Well, welcome to another Discover Headless Tech interview from headlesscreator.com. I am Marcelo Lune. The Headless Creators always get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. If you have any questions, comments, ideas for podcast interviews, courses, lessons, just send me an email. I'll get back to you. Today, I'm going to have a really cool conversation all about the M.A.C.H architecture. If you don't know what M.A.C.H stands for, don't worry about it. You'll know by the end of this interview. With my special guest, Kaya Ismail, and he's the founder of Wordify. You're going to learn a lot more about him in just a minute. But before we get started, you know how this works. For those of you watching live, go get your free account at headlesscreator.com. Once you get your free account, you'll have access to the podcast on demand, but also you'll have access to a bunch of other courses, lessons, workshops, boot camps. We have a whole bunch of stuff. So get your free account there, headlesscreator.com, and then you'll see you'll be able to access the content modeling weekly course, the entire Discover Headless Tech course, which includes not just the podcast interviews, but also a bunch of lessons, a whole bunch of focus on courses, the personalization bootcamp course. We're about to launch a bootcamp on uniform as well. So a lot of stuff coming up. Get your free account. You won't regret it. So with that said, I do want to remind you that this interview will be available on demand right after we're done. So like I said, get your free account. Now, with that said, let's bring in Kaya. So, hello there.
Hey, Marcelo. How you doing?
How are you? Welcome.
I'm very well. Thank you for having me on.
Glad to have you here. Thank you for being here. Now, where are you located currently right now?
Currently, I'm in Dubai, UAE.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So, right now it's about 7:30 in the morning. I'm in Southern California. What time is it over there?
It is, we're 12 hours ahead, so it's 7:30 p.m. for me.
Oh, so you're ready for dinner / drinks and all that kind of stuff.
I'm going to have my dinner a bit later on. I want to do this on an empty stomach, so hopefully my mind is buzzing.
Oh, I'm sure. So do people in Dubai eat late for dinner?
No, just me.
Oh, just you. Okay. So usually what time do people eat dinner in Dubai?
It's pretty standard. It's the same thing that you and your audience will be used to. Again, around this time, quite frankly.
About 7:30. Yeah.
People finish their work around 6:30 and head to dinner.
And then go for dinner. Yeah, it depends where in the world. I'm originally from Argentina, and over there they eat like at 10 o'clock at night. So it really depends around where in the world. Yeah, here about 5:30, 6:30, somewhere around there in the afternoon. So
yeah. There's a culture here of sort of grabbing a late snack, so that's maybe something that I could mention,
right.
Like grabbing a shawarma. So that usually happens.
Ooh, shawarma's good. Yeah. Okay,
yes.
That's good stuff, man. All right. But people didn't tune in for that. I mean, we could talk about that, but I don't think they tuned in for that. They did. They want to learn more about you and definitely about the M.A.C.H architecture. So why don't we just start? First of all, let's start with your background. Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into technology? How did you get into M.A.C.H and all of that stuff?
Yep. Excellent. Cool. So my name is Kaya. I was actually born and raised in London, UK, hence the accent. How I got into this industry, I wanted to become a blogger or a writer at the very sort of early stages of my career. Right? I wanted to write about something. I wasn't exactly sure what. Technology was high on the list. So it just so happened that one of my earliest freelance gigs was in the CMS space for a company called CMS Critic, who some of you may know. So I became the editor there over a course of three years, or slightly longer than that perhaps. Just again, writing about the CMS industry, sort of being a journalist in that space. I was attending events in that space in Europe and just sort of covering the news and the trends that were happening. I then, after about three and a half years there, I moved on to CMS Wire, and that's where I continued to do the same thing. But at the same time, in 2016, I launched Wordify, and Wordify is essentially a content marketing agency for the CMS, headless CMS, and digital experience platform space. So by that point in my career, I was already working closely with a lot of DXP and CMS vendors, helping some of them with their messaging, with their content. So I thought, why not sort of open up these services to the rest of the industry? And that's what we did. And, we're still thankfully going strong around about 5 years later. And we help DXP and CMS companies with their content. So all written content. If it's written content, then we help them with that.
I see. So you help like vendors that offer CMSs or headless technologies, sort of writing for the blog and for them. Is that the
Precisely.
main? Oh, okay, very cool. So
Yep.
5 years, huh?
Yep.
And
Yep.
what attracted you to CMSs in general as a writing topic? Did you go to school for writing, or I mean, what attracted you to
Um,
writing?
I I I um I always found it just sort of it came naturally to me, right? So I was always artistic growing up, not necessarily in the written form, but I was artistic in sort of the artsy form. I didn't go and study any of that. I tried to study architecture for a very short while, didn't work out, and I decided, I'm going to sort of try my, see how things go if I go down the freelancer route and the sort of, try and find clients myself, kind of thing. What attracted me to it, it just seemed to, it sort of meshed well with my lifestyle. I like to communicate with people, and it turned out I was okay at writing. So and like I mentioned, like technology was high on the list of things I wanted to write about, right? So when I was growing up, I sort of built websites as a kind of a hobby slash, entrepreneurial venture. I sort of helped other companies, build their small websites. I helped family members build their websites on WordPress and things like that. So I was already kind of familiar with the CMS space, and so it kind of makes sense. I wanted to write about something. I kind of had experience with this, and just after that first gig, it just sort of snowballed.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Now you have a part of Wordify. You have something called the DXP report. Real quick, what
Correct.
is that?
Yeah. So we launched the
And what
DXP
does DXP
report.
stand for? Also, bring.
Yes. So DXP report. So DXP stands for Digital Experience Platform, right? And that's essentially, the CMS industry has evolved into the DXP industry, sort of relatively naturally over the last 5 years or so. DXP Report, we launched it a year ago as a newsletter, right, for this industry specifically to help people stay on top of the news and the trends and the funding rounds that were happening in this space. And then about 3 to 4 weeks ago, we relaunched it as a newsletter that's also part of a broader publication. So if you head to dxpreport.com, you'll see we're publishing opinion pieces, on MACH, for example. We're covering news from funding rounds, Netlify's funding round, for example. And we're just sort of covering as much news as possible coming out of the space. And we're aiming to be the place where, the entire industry can have a voice. Because what I felt over the years, writing for a lot of other publications, is that, it's very much focused on the sort of top layer of the industry. Whoever's mentioning Gartner and Forrester reports, that's where the news is coming from. That's the industry. But in actuality, the industry is far broader than that, far deeper than that. There's a lot
Yeah,
more players doing a lot more interesting things, and they don't actually get spoken about very much. And
right.
what happens is they'd have to be their own marketing sort of, and we help them with that, of course. They have to be their own sort of PR company, marketing company, and really talk about themselves to get heard and seen. And there was no real publication or sort of third-party placement to go and speak about themselves in a way that wasn't sort of confined to the search engine optimization that you need to put into all the content you put out, right? So we want to be that space, that sort of conversation hub where all these vendors can come, and agencies as well, to sort of talk about themselves. We're launching a podcast soon as well, very similar to what you're doing here, to help them speak about, their vision for the next year, what's working for them, what's not working for them, what they feel about Mac, what they feel about Jamstack, what they feel about X, Y, and Z. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is in a nutshell.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's jump in and let's talk about Mac. No, we're not
Yep.
talking about Apple Mac. We're talking about
Yes.
MACH. So
Yes.
let's what is Mac? What does it stand for? It's obviously an acronym. Let's get
Yeah.
into that a little bit.
Cool. So before I do get into it, I see myself as somebody who tries to translate this sort of relatively technical language into a language that marketers and content people understand, because that's what I am. At my core, I'm a marketer. I'm a content person. I'm not a technical person. So I see my role as being that translator. So hopefully, I'm going to try and do that in this conversation. So MAC, it stands for Microservices, APIs, or API first, cloud native, and headless. Right. So we can get into the definition of each one of those in a moment, or would you like me to do that now?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about the architecture in general first, like the big
Mhm.
picture of how it
Yes.
works, and then yeah, let's jump into each of those, right? Because each of those are very
Yeah.
specialized.
Exactly. So in terms of how Mac architecture works, I think the best place to start is for us to start with, what came before Mac, right? What was the standard, and still
Exactly.
kind of is the standard actually, which is legacy monolithic architecture. So that word monolithic, a lot of developers and marketers would have seen this sort of being thrown around. and MACH is the sort of anti-monolith, right? And it can get confusing. So the monolith is, again, that sort of legacy type of architecture where every part of the software is sort of meshed together, intertwined, very tightly coupled with each other, very reliant on one another. And they're not individual pieces that can be sort of separated out and scaled individually and maintained individually, worked on individually, right? It's all part of the same monolith, right? That's where the word comes from. Very highly connected, very intertwined. And that becomes, as that product grows, that becomes very difficult to maintain, becomes very difficult to scale, it becomes very difficult to add to, it becomes very difficult to integrate with other technologies, right? Which is one thing that MACH is, trying to do, is to help technologies integrate with other technologies. So the monolith is something that's, is what it says on the tin. Think of a large monolithic structure that is super tightly bolted together, very difficult to separate out and add to and sort of modernize as well. It's very difficult to sort of modernize that in the face of a new trend, for example. So as we saw with the pandemic, a lot of companies who had a monolithic type of technology stack, they sort of struggled to make that shift. The digital working shift, for example, they suddenly had to sort of have a totally different digital experience for their employees and for their customers. And for a lot of companies, they couldn't do that very quickly, simply because their technology stack is quite rigid, again, bolted together. Things can't be separated out and changed and swapped around. So that's what a monolith is. And
usually provided by one vendor, right? So in other words, and we know that a vendor can be good at one thing, but can't be good at everything. So when you get the whole package, you're going to be lacking features in some other things, right?
Exactly. So typically you get a sort of one-size-fits-all solution from one vendor, and they say to you, hey, come to us, we've got everything you need under one roof. You don't need to go anywhere else. One size fits all. It's well, I say one price. Usually it's more than one price, but that kind of messaging. And yeah, as you mentioned, that vendor may be quite good at certain things, but they may not be good at other things. And also, the whole, the argument of being a jack of all trades comes in as well. How good can they be if they're sort of trying to be the CMS, the personalization engine, the A/B testing engine, and other things. If they're trying to be everything, e-commerce. If they're trying to be everything, it's highly unlikely they're going to excel at any of them, really. But yeah, this sort of sets up the paradigm shift, which is happening now. And again, maybe the pandemic accelerated it and was a catalyst, but it was kind of happening anyway. Of companies shifting away from that sort of monolithic, highly intertwined architecture and going towards an architecture that is, again, microservices based. And I know we're using terms here that we need to define, but
well, let's start with that. Let's start with, because the M in MACH is microservices, right? So explain microservices. What do we mean by that?
Yeah. So now that we've defined the monolith, the microservices, they are individual pieces of functionality or services or features of a product that are sort of they're independent in pretty much every sense, right? So they're independently developed, deployed, scaled, and managed, and they're not reliant on other services. So, for example, in a monolith, if your CMS goes down, your CMS has an issue or has a bug, that's going to impact your e-commerce arm. It's going to impact the CRM. It's going to impact everything else because everything's so tightly coupled and integrated together. If one part of your technology stack goes down, for example, it's going to probably bring other parts of your system down too. Whereas with microservices, it's like the anti-monolith where everything is separated out and they communicate with each other instead of being sort of tightly bolted together. Instead, they communicate with each other via APIs. That's the next part of the acronym. And I think APIs, the way I like to see it, is almost like a universal language between software where they're able to communicate, but they're not necessarily connected in that sense. So again, the microservices, very independent. They're not reliant on anything else. They communicate with others, but they themselves can be scaled independently up and down. They can be worked on by a team specifically for that feature or that service. And whatever happens within that microservice doesn't